Next curve.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Next Curve's Rethink Podcast, where we break down the latest tech and industry events and incidents into the insights that matter. And I'm Leonard Lee, Executive Analyst at Next Curve, and I'm joined by my good friend, Prakash Sangam. Everyone knows you, Prakash. You're like Mr. Tech Analyst guy. Yeah, he's the founder and principal analyst at Tantra, Analyst, and a good friend of mine. We're like literally neighbors. And thanks for joining me. Prakash.
Sure, great to be here. Back here.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about the United States versus Google. Looks like the judgment came down, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking about maybe some of those implications that everyone's curious about and provide our takes on what we think is going to probably transpire next and how it might impact the quote unquote tech industry as we know it. But before we start, remember to like, share, and comment on this episode and subscribe to the Rethink Podcast here on YouTube and Buzzsprout. Take us on the road and on your jog, and listen to us on your favorite podcast platform. And also, later on, Prakash is going to provide his contacts and provide you with some details on how to tap into Tantra Analyst research and get plugged in. This will be toward the end of the podcast, so make sure to stick around. And with that, Prakash, let's get started, my friend.
Sure. So I think major, legal decision, especially on the antitrust side of it after a very long time. And it is a major decision which will, depending on, it's just right now on the merits of the case that DOJ had put in. There is a separate trial on the remedy part of it. We'll see how that goes, but it's extremely important and will affect and change a lot of things. Again, depending on how the remedy comes out to be. And at a very high level, I think it might seem like it's bad news for the tech industry, but if you really open up, it's not all that bad. I think. The judge did have opinions which are very well balanced. I wouldn't say, you're a monopoly, and because of that, you're a monopolist. He didn't take that route. I would say he used more of a scalpel than a hatchet. Dissect the case and general advertisement, display advertisement, and others. No, it's no monopoly. Others are. Google is not a monopolist. The others are coming up like Amazon and Walmart and others. But in search engine specifically, paying somebody to be the default search engine in this case, Apple, I think he said specifically that is illegal and we have to remedy it, right? So that I think gives a lot of strength to the companies in other antitrust cases that DOJ and FTC have against them in the country. And of course, European Union is full of antitrust. At
the moment. And I think there's a lot of motivations for that outside of actual antitrust. But then I think... and that can be argued, right, endlessly. But there's no doubt that Google is big. In that particular market definition, yes, they are quite dominant. And my review of the final judgment here, I agree with you. They didn't take a hatchet or a hammer to this thing. It was a bit of more of a precision action looking at specific anti-competitive behaviors and the implications. And so, I thought that seemed pretty reasonable. Now, I thought still there's some interesting nuances. There's been a lot of comparison between this and the Microsoft case from years back regarding Explorer. Is it a product? Is it a feature?
Yeah.
And such. And in this case, the context poses an interesting reference to how the judge seems to have looked at the competitive situation at the moment, and it's weird because these arrangements are done with third parties where, like, so Google with Verizon, Google with, they had these revenue share agreements, with operators, very notably with Apple, as well as other parties, right? And so this is a broad practice that Google had in place to create sort of a commercial walled garden. Obviously, something that would be really difficult for a lot of other smaller players if they even wanted to play in this game, in the search market, to pony up to have a seat at the table. So in that way, it kind of makes sense. I'm not quite sure about the, sort of this allegory with the Microsoft case, though. Although there are some maybe nuances that might have bearing on how all this stuff transpires, at the end of the day. I don't know. What's your reaction?
Yeah, so I think the comparison with Microsoft is applicable, if you will, is more on antitrust and specific behavior of a certain product in the portfolio.
Yeah.
I think we will know more when we go into the remedy phase, if the remedy is as significant as Microsoft or AT&T's was, where the company had to be broken off in AT&T's case. In Microsoft case, they had to unwind and untangle the Explorer from everything that they offer and part of Windows, right? So here, I think, looking at how surgically he has dealt with, I wild guess here, he will be, if he takes the same surgical approach, logical approach, would be, hey, in all of this thing in this business, this paying for being a default option is the problem. Was what he has pointed out. So you unwind those deals and such you're doing, and let everybody choose whatever default they want to do it without influence. That would be a big win for Google, and that will change few things, but not too much for them. But instead, he says that the whole search engine kind of business had to be separate from everything Google has. That's going to be a huge change. Then it'll be more like AT&T or Microsoft, I would say.
But here's what's really interesting. When you really look at the market, and the business that search engines are in, it's actually not search. It's actually advertising.
Correct. Yeah. So using the, it's more of the practice, right? It's not using search engine for what reason, right? For serving advertisements, you based on that search engine. So he made it clear that general display advertisement, there is no monopoly. There are others there. So the specific, that's what I'm saying. It's surgical and scalpel is because he said, okay, you have default search engine and you're paying for it, and that is antitrust and monopolistic because it will give you oversized influence in getting the search ad revenue, right?
And that's the interesting thing here is the perception of, well, there is monopoly power, and it's not illegal to be a monopoly.
Correct.
It's the anti-competitive behavior or whatever kind of dynamic that you are playing out. So, the way that you read it boiled down a lot to that, the exclusivity, the nature of the exclusivity agreements as well as the revenue share then, right?
Correct. And also there is another antitrust case against Google, which is, I think, will be in the court in next few months on overall display advertising revenues and how much power they have there, and to basically dismantle that. I think this case will have bearing on that. I think both parties will have something to argue with as a precedence if this goes through appeal and stays, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. So, what are some of your takes on the implications of this? On the surface, yeah, obviously there are going to be some revenue share dollars that are at risk. A lot of media is reporting on that, but I think that's some of the obvious, right?
Correct.
In terms of like industry implications, right? As you look at the value chain that supports Google's businesses and its partners in this regard, or they can call it, I guess you can call it the ecosystem in this regard. What are some of your thoughts there in terms of impact points?
Yes. So off the gate, I think Google has best search engine, right? Everybody agrees that. So when most of the people, even when they get their Microsoft PC, the first thing they do is download Chrome, and second is basically change the default search engine. Even on I use Edge, I like actually Microsoft Edge browser better than Chrome, but whenever I get a new PC, the first thing I do is basically go change the search engine. I used Bing. I don't, for some reason, don't like it. The results are not good, and with the overview, I think there's no match for Google search engine as on its own, right? So I think implication is, even if they don't make it default, I think they still will have a majority of the market share.
Yeah.
I think the on the phone side, I think there is less reluctance. It's not as easy to change search engine, so the market share there definitely will come down, and this will give even more impetus for others to come up with their search engine, right? There has been a forever rumor that Apple is working on its own search engine. Makes sense.
Yeah.
This gives them even more impetus that they cannot have a default, and they're not getting paid for having a default search engine. So then why not they have their own? Of course there will be some antitrust concerns with that as well, but they make it default. Like there are tons of default settings on any application like browser, so they make it default and allow others to use other search engines as well. I think that will be okay. So that will be the biggest impact. I don't think Bing, obviously it might increase some of the market share, but I don't see Bing to be majorly impacted really by this. Others like DuckDuckGo and who have specific use cases, search engines, those will be affected for sure. And of course, you talked about how it will affect Google's business of search ads. That will have a huge impact there. All depends on the remedy, but that will see huge change.
Yeah, the way I look at it, I don't know how big. I kind of have a doubt. I have doubts as how big of an impact there will be, just simply because it's not like you're shipping out AOL CDs, right?
Yeah.
Or Netscape CDs, and there's this huge, time lag and actual physical distribution that's involved in installing a browser. Selecting the default browser is actually pretty easy. You can do that on iOS right now.
Yeah.
It's just not initially default. You are opted by default into Google.
Correct.
Right. And And then, obviously there's the whole revenue share piece behind that. But you're making a good point about the hyper competitiveness. So that's another theme that pops up all the time with antitrust is what's the difference between hyper competitive and anti-competitive behavior. And I agree with you. There's another thing that works in Google's favor in that search is actually bundled with, at least at the UI level, with a bunch of Google services, whether it's through the browser or through,
apps or other applications, right?
Yeah. So
I would say search is like integrated to almost every service that Google offers. So
right. And so, but this might be like what you were alluding to earlier, a shot across the bow in terms of how the DOJ and antitrust cases against quote unquote big tech, which, I'll remind everyone, I'm not a big fan of that term, how cases against them may be prosecuted and sort of the temperament that judges might have in coming to decisions on these antitrust cases, but also in the way that they look at and interpret what might be prosecuted as anti-competitive behaviors, right?
mm-hmm.
So this is definitely something to watch because what you mentioned earlier, this is just one of many cases coming to Google, Apple. Apple has a big one, right? They're trying to get that dismissed. You have Meta, you have all the big guys, right? Amazon as well. So this is probably a good expression of the mindset at the moment by, the DOJ in particular of how they're, it's probably giving them a lot of encouragement at the moment.
Yeah, and at the same time, of course, it is a win after very long for DOJ on the antitrust side, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it will give them some confidence. But at the same time, I don't think it's a unqualified win, right?
Yeah.
So specific. It's very the findings are very specific actions, monopolistic actions by the company.
Yeah.
It's not just overall because you have monopoly and because of that. You are a monopolist, right? So, which I think, Amazon's, Meta, Apple, everybody's looking at it. I think they'll be happy to know that, so they can use that argument in defining what a market is, what actions they're monopolistic or not on what they're doing, right? So,
and that could be an encouraging thing.
Correct.
At least, you're right. That's a great point. Great point.
Yeah.
So, I guess we'll see because Google is going to appeal, and I'm sure.
Correct, and then it's only half the battle now, right? The bigger, I would say I don't know if it's called bigger or not, but equally important battle is on the remedy side as well. Mm-hmm. How big the remedy is going to be. Mm-hmm. If this case is this trial is any indication, it'll if the judge takes again the scalpel versus hatchet approach, then I think Google will be more happy than DOJ, I would say. Yeah.
That's true. So
also this might strengthen some cases in EU and in other places where basically all the antitrust agencies in the world are looking at US and EU in terms of how these things turn out, so that they can turn up or down the heat in their own respective countries. So this gives some material to them to think about how they strategize to address the.
Yeah, that's true. For the up till this point, in many ways, the EU has been setting a lot of precedent, right, in
Yeah.
terms of regulation, but then also, in terms of how they're prosecuting and positioning antitrust cases. So, really interesting. So, anything else to share? Any last points before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I think just to summarize, it seems like a loss for Google, but it is not as big, in my view. Depending on how the trial goes, for the remedy, there'll always be a cloud on its head regarding it on almost all the big tech as such. But there is some ray of hope as well that it will not be a hatchet that will basically quash and make companies break and so on. So we'll see what happens in the remedy phase.
Yeah, I think that last bit is it would be a great improvement, by the way. So.
Okay.
But anyways, hey Prakash, thanks so much for jumping on really quickly, actually, to discuss this, because you and I both thought, oh, this might be an interesting thing to talk about, and hopefully inject some clarity into the discussion about this event. But why don't you quickly share with the audience how they can get in touch with you and Tantra Analyst?
Absolutely. So all of my research is on a website, www.tantraanalyst.com, Tantra analyst.com. Just like this one, I also have a podcast called Tantra's Mantra, and I write for Forbes, USA Today, and many tech publications. So all of that is available on the portal. So I encourage your audience to go check that out, and let us know how we are doing, or especially on this podcast and others, on how we are doing, whether they agree with or don't agree with us. Also, any other subjects of interest to them in terms of research.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. And please, everyone, subscribe to our podcast, which will be featured on the Next Curve YouTube channel. Check out the audio version on Buzzsprout, and find us on your favorite podcast platform. Also, subscribe to the Next Curve research portal at www.next-curve.com for the tech and industry insights that matter. And Prakash, once again, glad to have you on the show. Thanks for sharing your insights, and we'll see you next time.